Bitcoin for Peace. I have somebody with me here who is the reason why I am a hardcore Bitcoiner. This is Alex Gladstein, the Chief Strategy Officer of the Human Rights Foundation. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to having this chat with you for quite a while. You've definitely impacted myself and obviously many people around the world with your work, your dedication, and your passion as a human rights activist, as a Bitcoin educator, and as a community builder. So thank you for everything that you're doing. You're definitely transforming the world. So what's happening over there with you today? Are you ready for the halving?
Oh yeah, we're psyched. We've been looking forward to the halving. We have a fun announcement coming out on the halving at block height. Um, 840,000. So looking forward to that tomorrow, and yeah, celebrating the continued uh, way that Bitcoin distributes new currency into the world in a predetermined way that cannot be corrupted is pretty great. So we're big halving fans over at the Human Rights Foundation.
Let's talk about the Human Rights Foundation a little bit for people who may not know. My audience is definitely more creators and healers. We're environmentalists. We're people who
Hmm.
are, not necessarily up to date on finance. And I think the reality is, like, as change makers, as activists, everybody wants to go make the world a better place. But if we're not including sound money in the equation, I think we're building a three-legged table. And so I think Bitcoin is obviously a huge solution that we have to have an understanding for, whether you're an environmentalist, a human rights activist, a domestic violence person. How is the Human Rights Foundation addressing this with Bitcoin?
Yeah, so basically 5.7 billion people live under an authoritarian regime um, today around the world, and they don't have the same protections that we even have in liberal democracies. And in many cases, they have a very weak currency. And this started to pop up in our work over the years. We started to see how people in under different kinds of autocratic governments had a lot of problems with money, um, just in general, in terms of it being low quality and hard to connect to the world. That's an issue for everybody who lives in a dictatorship,
Mm-hmm.
but in particular, activists were having their bank accounts frozen and getting cut off, uh, on account of their opposition to the government or their dissent or their writing or their free speaking freely or whatever they were doing, their art perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
If it offended, it was going to get frozen was the idea. So you started seeing all over the world governments begin to adopt financial repression as a censorship tactic. This became a lot more prevalent after 9/11, when in general financial systems became more weaponized and political, in terms of where you saw the rise of AML, KYC, like all this stuff, as the digital economy was maturing and it became much more centralized and controlled. And you had the WikiLeaks banking blockade in 2010, which was a pretty formative moment
Mm-hmm.
for Bitcoin, because obviously in 2011, Assange posted a Bitcoin address to the WikiLeaks Twitter account, and the rest is history in terms of people understanding that this was money that couldn't be stopped by governments. That was very interesting. And then you just started to see a variety of use cases in terms of activist movements around the world, individual activists who had been deplatformed turned to Bitcoin. And that started as a trickle, and now it's a flood. So you have many, many people around the world now doing this. And there's a kind of a global resistance forming of people who are working on different things with different perspectives, but they share a commitment to using Bitcoin and educating their colleagues about it. So it's really inspiring, actually. It's cool.
It is. Getting to go to El Salvador, I felt like it was hope in action with the people on the ground, even though obviously, taking the politics out of things, I think when you're around people who are excited about the future, it's contagious. Um, you were in Malawi, and with your the Stranded article that you did, can you talk a little bit about what's happening over there with the energy and how people are coming to
Mhm.
a place where they can have a more flourishing life because of Bitcoin mining and getting electrified villages?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, just on the El Salvador thing, I mean, the reason Bitcoin is cool is because Bukele can't stop it, right? That's why it's
Yeah.
cool. So there's a lot of organizations he's persecuting, and they're gonna use Bitcoin, which is, as they put it to me, poetic justice. Um, in Africa as a continent, there are 600 million people, more or less, who don't have access to electricity. There are a lot of others who are living in what we call energy poverty. There's a lot of
Hmm.
people in Latin America in energy poverty. There's a lot of people in Asia in energy poverty. In general, you don't want to be in energy poverty. In general, you want to live in a country that has a high per capita, usage of electricity. The There's a direct correlation between your wealth and how much electricity you use.
Yeah.
Um, so in Malawi, only 11% of people have access to electricity.
11% of the people have
Yeah,
electricity.
yeah.
Wow.
Well, that have access to the national grid, right? Um, So, without power, there's no freedom, basically. I mean, without power, you don't have a lot of freedom over your life, what you can do. It is especially difficult on women. It's just very profound to gain access to electricity. Changes everything. And we, of course, forget that. But if you visit a place that just recently got it, they will talk to you about all the implications. Like, it's better for the students and the kids. They can study at night instead of being in the darkness. They can Their test scores get better. They get into better schools. People live longer because you can have refrigeration, sanitation. You can have different kinds of medicine and different kinds of medical equipment powered social interactions. If you don't have electricity, then what happens is the men they drive to a town with electricity to like watch TV or football or soccer or whatever, and that brings them away from the family. So having electricity at home brings family together. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
interesting, very profound things, and clearly we want everybody in the world to have access to electricity. So the problem is there's not really a lot of incentive for people to come in and help people in rural parts of places like Malawi to gain access to electricity um, until Bitcoin, because previous to Bitcoin, all this stuff was basically what we call concessional financing. So it was donations. And there's just people are a little lazy. It takes a long time. Again, there's no urgency, and there's no real money often for like expansion or maintenance or advancement. It's like there's a one-time gift made. It takes 5 to 10 years to happen, and then there's some electricity, and that's it. There's not This is not thought of as in a sustainable way. So the cool part about Bitcoin is it changes that, because um, it gives a capitalist free market incentive uh, to come in and create electricity,
Yeah.
because immediately 100% of what is built can be bought. You have revenue right away. Now, from a grid management perspective, this is very important because a lot of places in rural Africa, the power source might be hydro, right? So it's very intermittent in terms of demand, but the supply is baseload, more or less. Obviously, seasonally, the rivers shift, but generally speaking, the river's running all the time. Meanwhile,
Hmm.
the village sleeps, right? So you have, as anyone has ever looked at an electricity demand curve, there's obviously it's lower at night, like the demand. So what happens is you normally uh, the river's running, and they have to just sort of dissipate this energy at night. So when you're the local power company, when you can get paid for 100% of uptime, that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
Because the Bitcoin network is just sitting there buying all of the energy the village or the variety of local industries are not going to use. So it allows you to eliminate energy waste. And that allows that power company to have more capital, to hook up more homes, to expand, to consider creating a new operation, to make a new microgrid setup, uh, the river next door. I mean, it really changes the game. And it's profound when you visit a site like that and start to realize what's going to happen here in terms of just the difference it makes to have a new technology that can buy power anytime, anywhere in the world, any, in any place, and eliminate waste and energy. It's pretty incredible. So saw that, wrote that up in an essay called Stranded, and folks can read that. And it's relevant everywhere. I mean, especially in Malawi, but every single power generation site in the world more or less wastes energy in some way or another.
Yeah.
Maybe not, it's possible that in very hyper-connected advanced urban areas, there's like elegant balancing and there's very little waste. But even like in France, there's the nuclear grid, 70% of the nation's electricity is powered by nuclear, and there's waste. There's waste in California, a very rich place in the world, right? California has massive curtailment of solar and wind, right? So there's literally just waste. So even in rich, advanced countries and places, there's a lot of waste, and then there's just enormous amounts of waste in rural areas where there's no grid. So you make an energy, you have variable demand consumer, and there's no grid. So there's no one else to buy what is being wasted. Enter Bitcoin again. So Bitcoin buys 100% what you cannot sell. And it's this elegant thing that's variable. Like it turns on and off to fit a flow. So it's very powerful from that perspective. So to conclude, if this thing can, expand electricity for people, it can bring freedom, and it can bring a lot more. And honestly, it's funny because the media says that Bitcoin is a waste of energy, but the reality is that not Bitcoin mining is almost always wasting energy.
Yeah, I remember you were saying that in, talking about in Stranded. I think that's super true. And so thinking about peace as an objective for planet Earth, do you believe that we have the ability through Bitcoin, through all of these other tools and shifting people's minds, can we achieve a state of peace on planet Earth?
I don't know, probably not. But I think that Bitcoin's a powerful, peaceful tool. It's a powerful mechanism to allow people to interact and collaborate in a peaceful way.
Yeah.
I think it certainly steers us in that direction. I think it can dramatically reduce unnecessary conflict, basically by bringing more constraint and accountability to governments. This is really important because governments in like the pre-fiat standard, governments traditionally would fight war through taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go back and look, the Romans or the Crusades or any of these large wars, the Mongols, there was some sort of hard currency standard, right? At some point, during these eras, and the government couldn't necessarily just create bonds
Mm-hmm.
and sell them to the world to fight a war. Like that wasn't necessarily a market. And oftentimes borrowing had limits. So governments would tax to fund war. So this is important because it links the population to the war. So if
Yeah.
you're getting taxed, you're paying it, about it. And if they tax you too much, you're going to fight back. So, whether you look at kings in England or India or East Asia or Latin America, wherever, war was, big way financed by taxes. And that's because of the constraints of that harder currency standard, right? And that's how it was until basically 1971. I mean, if you look at my country, the United States, and the way we financed war, even as we were a sort of republic congealing into this centralized kind of empire that we are now, taxes were how we paid. Like taxes paid for a big chunk of World War I, and half of World War II was financed by taxes. All of the Korean War was financed by taxes. So these were wars where even if individuals disagreed, a lot of the public agreed. Like a lot of the public agreed, consented to the war, paid for it with their own treasure. Okay. Knew about the war, understood it was going on, even in an age of very limited media, knew exactly what was going on, more or less. And not only with taxes, but also with war bonds. So the public would give the US government money, and then they would receive a Liberty Bond, that's what they called it. And then you would hopefully get paid back later. So that was something that was done at a huge scale. So in World War II, like more than 70 million Americans bought Liberty bonds. So basically, like there was war, there was terrible war, but it was done not in knowledge with and in roughly in consent with the population. So after the late 60s, we go to fight this war in Vietnam. The Cold War heats up. We run out of gold. And Nixon severs the link between our currency and gold in 71. And after that, you don't see taxes anymore funding
Yeah.
wars. So we haven't had war taxes since 1967. So we haven't raised taxes to fight war. We don't have specific war taxes anymore. We don't even really have specific war bonds anymore in a meaningful way. We haven't had those since that year either. What the government figured out was now that we were on the fiat standard, there was no limits to borrowing for war.
Yeah.
That's really important. So it's something to think about. Like basically all the forever wars post 9/11 have all been paid for by quiet borrowing. Like the public doesn't know, they're not paying taxes. There's no draft. They're not sending their kids off to the war, without some sort of choice. And the financing part of it's basically behind closed doors. Nobody really knows. Now later, obviously, we feel implications of it over time, but it's like very quiet financing. Um, that's really dangerous for democracy, in my opinion, and that's an externality of the fiat system. It's what fiat standard makes possible. Um, I don't think that like Bitcoin's going to end all wars. I think that's probably silly. Um,
I do
I
too.
think I think it can like it doesn't it like think about Russia today. Like even on a Bitcoin standard, Russia may really feel like it needs to invade Ukraine, and it has a bunch of let's say it has a bunch of Bitcoin. It could spend the Bitcoin to fight the war. I mean, if it's a dictatorship, like, and there's something it really wants to do. I mean, how is that going to stop it? What I think Bitcoin prevents is like quiet. Obviously, it prevents like quiet financing for war. It forces governments. It's going to force governments to basically be more engaged with the population in war fighting, because they're going to need tax money to pay for the war. But they're not going to be able to like quietly borrow to do it as easily in a fiat in a Bitcoin standard. So I think that wars will still happen, but there'll be more wars of necessity or regional wars or wars that are for whatever reason important for a particular country. But these like colonial, faraway, distant, forever resource wars that have nothing to do with the daily life of the average person, I just don't see these getting funded to the same extent as today. So I think that's really those are the kind of wars that Bitcoin prevents, and that's very positive, I think, for humanity. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, we talk a lot about different tools for creating, a better world, a more peaceful society. And you've obviously been an activist in human rights for almost 2 decades. I think about the mental health implications of a sound money versus fiat. And so the fear that we all live under with, inflation, with all of these wars, with not being able to pay our bills, having 2, 3 jobs, etc., it creates a lot of mental stress. As a human rights activist, I got to go to the Oslo Freedom Forum in Miami a couple years ago, and that's when I
Hmm.
really got turned my corner. I've just got started in Bitcoin in 21. I was listening to you, and as soon as I like learned about, um, was it Roya? I don't know if it was Roya or somebody who was escaping, and they had their seed words sewn into their clothing. And I believe it.
Hmm.
It was you doing it. It might have been an interview you did with Peter, but once I started realizing that, I was like, wow, okay, I've always been about peace, love, music, personal development. Let's make the world a better place. But now I realized Bitcoin was one of the missing ingredients for this. And so when I was standing in line to get in at Oslo Freedom Forum, I met a woman who was a psychologist and a counselor, and I was like, "What are you doing here? You know, this is." And she just gave me that look, like, "Do you understand how hard it is to be a human rights activist?" And I was like, "I guess I'm going to find out, aren't I?" You know, and then getting to go in and listen to all of these stories, you know, and the work that everybody's doing, it can certainly weigh you down, I think, mentally and emotionally and energetically. Um, how do we as individuals and how do we as a global society get stronger, even if we're going to have Bitcoin as a tool? How do we keep our mental health? How do you keep your mental health strong as an activist?
Mm,
You know, and like,
that's a great question. I think most many of the um, activists we deal with, obviously, are going through. It's a tough time.
yeah,
They're losing friends, family. They have to get uprooted. They're living somewhere else. It's very difficult. So we design programs to help them with that. So we have
really,
that,
oh, cool.
um, which is very important and very cool. We've done a variety of different things, ranging from counseling to having a mentorship to MDMA therapy. We've done all kinds of different interesting things to
Wow.
help activists. Um, as far as me personally, yeah, I just get very inspired by them, and I just get fired up, and I'm ready to go, and I'm very passionate, and every day I'm just very grateful for every day. Just practice a lot of gratitude. That certainly helps. Um, it's a lot of fun doing what we do. So everybody has their issues. We work through them, but I'm someone who, I believe gratitude, a little bit of meditation, exercise, being with family. These are these are good. Make sure you're not working all the time.
Yeah.
Carve out time to not work. These are basic tips. Yeah, I mean, trying to stay in shape is a good one. Uh,
Yeah, getting in
be,
nature. I
be
see a lot
active.
of you in nature.
My dog is always keeping us more active, so that's good. Um,
Good.
yeah, these are variety of things, but don't you gotta pull back sometimes from the work. But man, it's hard for the activists. If you're working on a conflict right now where there's people dying, you will sit there and you will just for months you'll just not really move. You'll just lock in. And that's very unhealthy. So people have to take care of themselves.
Definitely. I think it's super important. And I know it's easy to get caught up, especially when it is life or death on the line, you know, and you feel like, okay, I can do just a little bit more. What if there was another 20 minutes I put in? You guys are going to be doing a thing with Ben next week for nonprofits, a webinar. HRF is going to be doing the how to help nonprofits onboard Bitcoin, which I think is super cool.
Yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and so I'm signed up for that. What do you think? Do you want to talk about your book a little bit? And I just want to plug it at least. I know we don't have a bunch of time left, but
Hmm.
Hidden Repression: How the IMF and World Bank Sell Exploitation as Development. Um, when I first got into Bitcoin, I might have even been before I got into Bitcoin, I listened to John Perkins' Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And I was like, oh, wow, what the heck is going on over here that I didn't know about, you know? Um, how, for the audience, just really quickly, like, do you want to just
Sure.
give us a little summary of this book so people can
Yeah.
understand? I know, super,
Uh,
but it's a great book, you guys. You got to get
yeah,
it.
I think like the great lie we tell ourselves is that we help weak countries. And the reality is we don't. The reality is we exploit them. I mean, that's really
Yeah.
what the book is about. The main idea is that traditional colonialism, which was a phenomenon where large governments, empires would use force to steal and loot and get slave labor
Hmm.
for their economies to make quality of life at home better. That's what colonialism is. It's about getting cheap goods from somewhere else and cheap labor from somewhere else, so you can have lower inflation at home and a higher quality of life at home. That and a higher purchasing power at home. That's what it is. Period. Full stop. That's what colonialism is. So that became like not so acceptable, thankfully, in the past, over the last 100 years. Now, some of it still, brazen colonialism still does exist. Look what Russia's doing in Ukraine, for example.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, that's not allowed. So, okay. So what happened is like the world basically changed and adopted debt colonialism. So basically, what would happen is instead of like sending a ship with cannons and guns and enslaving people, uh, they would send people on a business class flight to a five-star hotel in suits, and they would dispense a grant, a loan, loan sharks, basically.
Loan
Loan
sharks.
sharks.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Loan
thinking of.
sharks
Consummate loan
replaced,
sharks.
yeah, loan sharks. Loan sharks replaced naval warfare, right? When it comes to this, and they would go in and they basically offer a bunch of money at a high interest rate with conditions. And then this is the way they start to take advantage of a country. And this has been happening pretty consistently since since the 1960s across most of what we call the developing world. And I got interested in this because I was like, why is the IMF giving all this money to all these crazy dictators? Like I was just looking at it over the decades, the worst of the worst dictators. Marcos, Mobutu, Portillo. I mean, they all got money from the IMF, and I'm like, why? Like, what if our motives are to help people and to end poverty, like, why were we giving all this money to these insane lunatics?
Mm-hmm.
And then I started looking at all the context and background. And you realize that that's not our motive. Like, sorry, the IMF and World Bank's mission is not to end poverty or to help vulnerable people.
No.
It is to exploit resources and labor in these countries so that our economic machine runs better. And it is easier to work with dictators to do this than with democratic populations, because dictators can just force stuff through. There's no property rights. There's no protests. Like, it's easier. It's easier. It's easier. So at the end of the day, you realize that the policies that we imposed in concert with dictators around the world in the 70s and 80s and 90s and even today, were very deadly. I mean, basically what happened is the quality of life and the real wages and living standards would go down in these countries as a result of IMF policies.
Yeah.
And untold millions of people were killed by them. But there's never going to be any accountability, is what you realize. There's never going to be like some sort of tribunal or anything like that. People correctly moralize about how many people communism killed and Nazis killed, and that's important. That was devastating. But they never moralize about like, what about essentially like neoliberalism? How many people did that kill? Or maybe debt colonialism, we would call it. And the reality is it killed a lot of people. We don't like to talk about that, though. Most people don't even know about that. So my book was about describing this. It's called Hidden Repression. And, I do think Bitcoin's really interesting. Yeah, thank you. Because it is a way to like opt out of that system. If you're in the 1980s and your country's being structurally adjusted and your currency's collapsing, you really have no way out. Today, if that's happening, like that's happening right now in Egypt, Nigeria, elsewhere, you can get out. You can opt into Bitcoin. You can put your wages and labor into Bitcoin, and like you're subject to market forces, but basically you have no counterparty risk. You can't be demonetized. You can decide what you want to do with that money. It can't be taken from you. It can't be hyperinflated. And that's really amazing. So at a micro level, we know that Bitcoin is a good tool for people who are dealing with this sort of thing. And it may address it in a macro sense. Like it just may be much harder in the same way it would be to perpetuate all these like forever foreign wars. It may be much harder to perpetuate this global bailout system for dictators on a Bitcoin standard. It may require more accountability with the public, because taxation and voluntary involvement will be more related to spending of governments. So like the public is just going to be more clued into what's going on, at least in a democracy. And they may say, hey, actually, maybe not on that bailout to this ruthless dictator. Maybe not. So we'll see. I don't know. I'm open-minded about that. But what I know for sure is that this thing's a tool for getting people to escape repression today, which is cool and inspiring, and keeps us going forward. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's like super duper exciting. Every time, I've been going to a lot of environmental conferences lately with my partner, and anytime I start talking to, like, even if I say the B word, they're like, "It's melting the oceans," and they freak out and have all the typical FUD rebuttal. But as soon as I start saying, well, did you know that it could be used to escape authoritarian regimes or domestic violence? I had a woman on my episode a couple months ago who got out of an abusive relationship. You know, all of the different things. Did you know you can electrify villages? People start to go, oh, really? Okay, maybe I want to learn a little bit more. So I think we have a lot of opportunities, you know, for building bridges with different sectors of the world, whether they're environmentalists, creators, you know, business people, families who don't understand Bitcoin yet, you know, and I just, it's definitely, I'm still quite early, you know, and I think we as Bitcoiners are quite early. So it's really, it's exciting. You know, I think of Ludmilla from Open Dialogue Foundation, who,
Mhm.
you know, they had to use Bitcoin and were getting persecuted and had to leave and all this. So I just feel like a lot of people, when they start to understand how Bitcoin can help activists, you know, I think it's going to be um, just more widely accepted, you know, in different places. So, all right. So let's wrap it up, Alex. I know you got to rock. Oslo
Sure.
Freedom Forum. You want to, we'll plug it. Tell everybody what's Oslo Freedom Forum.
Sure. It's the Human Rights Foundation's flagship event. It takes place in Norway, June 3 to 5. It'll be the 16th year we're doing it. It brings together an eclectic group of people to focus on issues of human liberty. We're going to have speakers from all over. Let's see, just pulling it up now. I can plug it a little bit. Let's see.
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, we have speakers from Uganda, Gaza, Russia, Nicaragua, Lebanon, Iraq, Zimbabwe. Um, we have Venezuela, Hong Kong, Cambodia, India, Rwanda, Azerbaijan. We have speakers working on um, projects like trauma research. We have speakers working on open source software. Jack Dorsey will be coming. Uh, Meredith Whitaker, the president of Signal, is coming. We'll have Lynn Alden coming. It'll be a great lineup. And then separately, we'll have a financial freedom track. And that'll be like a full, we haven't released the details of that yet, but that'll be like a full day on Bitcoin stuff, on Bitcoin and freedom stuff. So we're excited about that. So yeah, go to oslofreedomforum.com. We intentionally make the tickets very cheap, so people it should be very accessible for people. There will also be a live stream that we attend later, that we publicize later. But basically, you know, if you're a student, it's $15 to attend the conference, and it's $50 for anyone to attend. There's obviously more expensive tickets you can get if you want to come to the dinners and things like that. But as far as like experiencing, 90% of the program, it's very, very, very inexpensive. So we try to really lower the bar to make sure anyone can go, and it's gonna be really fun. So June 3 to 5. Hope to see some of you there.
Awesome. I hope one day I'll get to get over to Oslo and join you
Mhm.
for sure. I know I got lucky to get to go to the Miami one, which was, I know,
Yeah,
not
that was
normal for
fun.
you to do it there. It was
That was the
great.
pandemic exception, but
Pandemic, exactly.
uh
All right. Well, everybody, you guys can go follow Alex at
thanks.
alexgladstein.com, and you can follow him on Twitter at Gladstein. Any final words, Alex, for somebody who is looking to get into Bitcoin, who's an activist, who's a change maker, who, you
Mhm.
know, is a little nervous? What would you say to somebody new?
I mean, look, just invest your time learning as much as you can, and then look, if you have a solid foundation, try to um, yeah, try to make a difference with an organization or a group of people you care about. Start first with your family or friends, but there's probably a cause out there that could use this thing, and you should definitely be reading our newsletter. So if you go to hrf.org/, financial freedom report, you can sign up. The financial freedom report is a weekly newsletter. It comes out every Thursday. Just hit this morning. And it's just a great overview of what's happening in the world with global currency issues, inflations, hyperinflations, financial isolation, and the good news, what's happening on the Bitcoin front. So, would definitely recommend people do that. Thanks for having me. Happy having. Watch this space. Talk to you soon. Thank you.
All right, cool. Thanks a lot, Alex. Take good care, and we'll chat
Sure.
soon.